My sister tried to steal my inheritance by convincing our elderly father to rewrite his will, smirking. You'll never see a dime of this money. When I found out, I hired a private investigator, and the day she walked into the lawyer's office, she was met with a stack of evidence against her. As the papers were read aloud, her smug grin vanished, and the final decision left her sobbing in rage. Let me say this right at the start. I am not the kind of person who looks for revenge. I don't stir drama. I keep to myself, I mind my own business, and I treat people the way I want to be treated. But when someone tries to take advantage of my elderly father, when someone lies, manipulates, and steals, and that someone is your own sister? That's when things change. This isn't something I ever thought I'd be writing about. But if you've ever had a family member show you who they really are, you'll understand why I'm here. I'm a 46-year-old guy living just outside Rochester, New York. I work in IT and I'm a pretty simple guy. Divorced. No kids. I visit my dad every weekend and have been doing so ever since my mom passed 5 years ago. My dad is 87 now. He's always been sharp, stubborn, and old school. He worked for the post office for 40+ years and saved every penny. My mom was the same. She passed from cancer in 2020, and after that, I stepped up to help my dad. Grocery runs, doctor's appointments, basic errands. Now my sister, let's call her Diane. She's 10 years younger than me. Married, lives in Buffalo, flashy lifestyle. Social media obsessed. She was never really close to our parents. Barely visited, even when mom was sick. My dad didn't have her phone number memorized. That tells you everything. She started showing up again last year. At first I thought, maybe she's finally coming around. I was wrong. Things started to feel off. It started small. I showed up one Sunday afternoon and Diane was already there. I was surprised because she never gave me a heads up. She had coffee in her hand, her shoes off like she owned the place, and she was talking to Dad in this sweet, high-pitched voice she never used before. I walked in just as she was saying, "So if we just move the money to a joint account, it'll be easier for you. I'll take care of the bills, you won't have to worry." I didn't say anything at first. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. But something about her tone didn't sit right. She was pushing too hard. Smiling too much. The next few weeks, same thing. She kept showing up. Every weekend. Buying Dad takeout, flattering him, acting like she was the perfect daughter. Meanwhile, she was slowly isolating him from me. She'd schedule things without telling me. Talk over me during visits. Act like she was in charge. Then Dad started forgetting things. Not just little things, but big stuff. He asked me where his bank was one day, even though he'd gone there for decades. I said, "Key bank, Dad?" "Same one since '92. He replied. "Oh. I thought Diane said we changed it." That was the moment I knew something was wrong. The new account. I did some digging. Quietly. I didn't want to start a war until I had the facts. Turns out Diane had driven Dad to her own bank and opened a joint account. She had already moved over $150,000 from his original savings. Said it was to help him with his bills. The account had her name first. Not his. That money was supposed to be part of what our mom left us. She and Dad had agreed years ago that their estate would be split evenly between me and Diane when the time came. Dad even told me in front of Mom that I'd get the house since I was the one helping them out all the time. Now it looked like Diane was trying to rewrite everything behind my back. The will. Then the bomb dropped. Dad's longtime lawyer, let's call him Hal, called me out of the blue. He asked if I had any idea what was going on, because he had just received a new version of Dad's will, completely redrafted. It left everything to Diane. The house, the money, the life insurance, even small things like Mom's jewelry and furniture. I asked Hal to email me a copy. It was worse than I imagined. There was a paragraph that said, "To my son, I leave my love and support, but no financial inheritance." My name wasn't mentioned anywhere else. The original will, signed years ago, had us both listed equally, with clear notes on how Dad wanted things handled. This new one erased me completely. And it wasn't even written in Dad's tone. It was robotic, legal heavy, and just off. I was furious. But I stayed quiet. I needed to be smart. I confronted Diane the next weekend. I told her I knew about the will. About the joint account. About her trying to take over. She didn't deny it. She crossed her arms, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "You think someone like you deserves that money? You've got no kids. No wife. You live in that little house like a hermit. I'm the one with a family. I'm the one building a future. Dad wants me to have it." Then she smirked. "You'll never see a dime of this money. That's when I decided to go all in. I hired a private investigator. I knew I couldn't prove anything with just my word. I needed facts. I needed evidence that Diane was manipulating Dad when he wasn't mentally fit to make decisions. So I hired a private investigator. Tony Cataldo. Recommended by a buddy of mine from college. Former cop turned PI. Rough voice, no BS. First thing he said to me. If she's pulling something shady, I'll find it. I gave him everything. Dates, account changes, emails. He got to work. Within 2 weeks, he had a folder thick enough to make my jaw drop. What he found. Voice recordings. Diane recorded Dad on her phone while coaching him to say specific lines like, I want Diane to handle everything. You could hear her whisper the line, and then Dad repeat it, confused. In one recording, he even says, Wait, what are we doing again? Before she cuts the recording. Bank purchases. Over $12,000 in purchases were made with Dad's debit card from the joint account, her account. Spa visits, a Peloton, expensive handbags, and even a down payment for a condo in Buffalo. None of this was for Dad. Fake emails. She sent an email to Hal the lawyer pretending to be Dad. But it was full of emojis, casual phrases like LOL and circle back, and signed off with Cheers, Tom, which my dad never says. Hal knew immediately something was wrong. Medical statements. Tony tracked down a memory assessment from one of Dad's doctor visits Diane had tried to hide. It said Dad had early signs of vascular dementia, and was not considered mentally competent to make complex financial decisions without assistance. That right there was the nail in the coffin. I prepared for war. I didn't confront her again. I didn't tell her what I knew. I kept smiling, kept showing up, kept playing dumb. But in the background, I was working with Hal to prepare a case. The moment she tried to finalize anything, sell the house, move the money, or file the will, we would hit her with everything. The audio. The receipts. The fake emails. The medical records. All of it. She had no idea what was coming. I kept waiting for her to make a move. She'd been slowly draining the joint account, buying stupid stuff like expensive bedding, a kitchen remodel for her house, and even put down a deposit for a wellness retreat in Vermont. But then one Thursday, I got a call from Hal, Dad's lawyer. She's scheduled a meeting to finalize estate matters, he said. Friday morning? That was it. That was the trigger I'd been waiting for. Hal and I agreed, we wouldn't stop her from showing up. Let her walk in confident. Let her believe it's all hers. We'd be waiting. She arrives. She showed up at Hal's office in a black turtleneck and designer sunglasses like she was some Wall Street executive. Hair curled. Manicured nails. Smiling. She even brought a bottle of sparkling cider and said, I figured we could celebrate today. She had no idea I was already in the back room with Hal. Listening. Watching. Hal didn't flinch. Just said, Let's review a few things first before we proceed. Then he opened the folder. The folder. First, he pulled out the email she sent pretending to be Dad. She shifted in her seat and said, Oh, that? He asked me to send it for him. Hal replied. Then why does it end with emojis and the word cheers? Tom has never said that in 25 years of working together. No answer. Then came the bank statements. $9,000 to HomeGoods. $3,200 at a spa resort. A Peloton. Flights to Miami. All from the joint account. All during the time Dad was supposedly sick and bedridden. According to her. She crossed her arms. I was helping manage his money. He trusted me. Hal didn't blink. You were listed as a co-owner, not a guardian. You spent his retirement savings on personal luxury items. Then came the recordings. Tony, my PI, had helped clean up the audio to make it crystal clear. Diane's voice coaching Dad. Whispering. Say this part next, then we can go to lunch. Just say I want Diane to have the house. It's important, okay? Dad's voice was shaky, confused. Asking questions. Clearly not understanding what was happening. Diane tried to interrupt. Hal held up a hand. We're not finished, he said. The doctor's letter. Then Hal pulled out the final piece, the neurologist's assessment. The one Diane tried to hide. Dated 3 weeks before she brought him to sign the new will. It stated clearly. Mr. Dad's name exhibits moderate cognitive decline and cannot be considered competent to make legal or financial decisions independently. You could see her face change. The confidence was gone. Replaced by panic. She stood up. This is a setup, she snapped. You're just trying to screw me out of what I earned. I took care of him. Where were you while he was falling apart? I stepped into the room. My turn. I hadn't said a word up until now. I walked in and looked her dead in the eye. You took care of him? When? Between spa treatments and yoga retreats? She scoffed. You're just jealous. I ignored it. You used our father's illness to rewrite his will behind his back. You spent his money like it was Monopoly cash. And you laughed in my face and told me I'd never see a dime. Her mouth opened, then closed. Hal stood up and said, Diane, as of this moment, the revised will is being challenged on grounds of fraud, coercion, and elder manipulation. We will file with the court today. Then he handed her a letter. Return of assets demand. You have 7 business days. Now, here's something I didn't expect. As Diane stormed out of the office, red-faced and shaking, I noticed she left her phone behind. Hal picked it up, intending to call her back. That's when I saw the screen light up. A text from her husband. Tell him the money's gone. We needed it. He'll figure it out soon anyway. I asked Hal if I could see it. He nodded slowly. Turns out, Diane and her husband Brett were deep in debt. Credit cards maxed. Second mortgage on their house. Business loans unpaid. They weren't stealing just out of greed. They were drowning. They thought they could use Dad's money to climb out. That was their plan all along. Things got worse. The next day, Diane showed up at Dad's house screaming outside the front door. I had changed the locks 2 weeks ago, knowing this might happen. She banged on the door and yelled. You turned him against me. You had no right. Dad, who was in his chair watching Wheel of Fortune, looked at me and said, Who's yelling out there? She's just lost. I said. He shook his head slowly. She never visited when your mother was sick. She was always too busy. Now what? I knew things weren't over. Not even close. We were heading to court. The real battle was just beginning. Diane would try to fight. Maybe lie more. Maybe drag it out. But I wasn't afraid anymore. She made her move. She went too far. Now it was my turn to finish what she started. She got a lawyer, and he was bad news. A week later, Hal, our lawyer, got a letter from Diane's new attorney. Not a big firm. Some guy named Rick Menser from Buffalo. No website. No online reviews. Looked like he printed his letterhead on Microsoft Word. He was claiming the revised will was valid. That my sister acted in good faith. And had no knowledge of mental decline. At the time. He demanded we cease any interference. Or face legal consequences. I Googled him. Found out he had been suspended once for misuse of client trust funds. He got it reinstated somehow, but still. Sketchy. Hal wasn't fazed. These guys are just trying to scare us. But we're not backing down. Then came the twist I wasn't ready for. The secret loan. Tony, the private investigator, kept digging even after our initial reveal. He said, If she's desperate, there's probably more. People like this always leave a trail. And he was right. He found out Diane and her husband Brett had taken out a $75,000 private loan using Dad's house as collateral. How? I didn't understand at first. It was still in Dad's name. Then I saw the paperwork. She had forged Dad's signature. The notary? A friend of Brett's. Fake stamp. Totally illegal. The lender was some shady private group with a name like Falcon Ridge Holdings. Definitely not a bank. The kind of place that charges 19% interest and doesn't ask many questions. And now, they were coming to collect. I confronted her again. I had to talk to her. I didn't want to, God knows I didn't, but this was now about Dad losing his house. I called. She didn't answer. So I drove to Buffalo. Showed up at her place. She opened the door halfway and rolled her eyes. Oh look, the golden child returns. I said. You used Dad's house to borrow $75,000. Her eyes widened for just a second, then she shut the door tighter. I don't know what you're talking about. I shoved the folder into the gap. Here's the paperwork. With the fake signature. I know you forged it. She looked down, didn't say anything. Then whispered. We were going to pay it back. I laughed. With what? The money you blew on spa weekends and fancy backsplash tiles? She didn't answer. Just shut the door in my face. The lawyer tried to flip it. A few days later, Rick Menser filed something with the court claiming I had manipulated Dad into rescinding a valid will. Said I coached him to distrust his daughter, and that Hal, the lawyer, had a personal conflict of interest. Total garbage. Hal wasn't even surprised. This is desperation, he said. They're throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks. But it did slow things down. Now the court had to schedule a hearing for that mess too. Meanwhile, Diane still hadn't returned the stolen funds. The clock on the demand letter had expired. And Falcon Ridge Holdings? They started calling Dad directly. He picked up one day and said, "A man said I owe him money for the house?" I took the phone. Told them to never call again. Then added them to the lawsuit. A new voicemail. Here's where things got even messier. I got a voicemail from someone I didn't recognize. A woman. She said, "I know what your sister did. I was the caregiver for her husband's mom. She told me everything one night when she was drunk. She was laughing about how easy it was to trick your dad. If you want me to talk, I will." I called her back. Her name was Natalie. She had been a home nurse for Brett's mother, who had passed the year before. She said Diane once called her over for drinks during a night shift and started bragging. She said her dad barely knew what day it was. That she got him to sign things by telling him they were health forms. Said she had to lock things down before her brother got curious. Natalie agreed to write a statement and testify. Diane started to crack. Diane started calling my phone again. I didn't answer. She left voicemails sobbing, saying, "You don't understand what we were going through. We were drowning. I had to fix it." She texted me, "Please don't let them take the house. He won't survive the stress. You know that." That's when I realized something. She wasn't trying to hurt Dad. Not directly. She just didn't care enough not to. He was a tool. A means to an end. A way to escape her bad choices and fake lifestyle. And now it was all falling apart. Where things stand. So here's where we are now. We're going to court to challenge the will. Diane is being investigated for forgery, elder financial abuse, and possibly identity fraud. Falcon Ridge is suing to reclaim the loan. But now it's clear the loan was issued with fake documents, so they're tangled up in this mess too. Natalie, the caregiver, is giving a full statement under oath. Tony is still digging. He says there's more. He always says that. I wish I could say this is wrapping up soon, but it's not. It's just deeper than I thought. Every time I think we've hit the bottom, the floor drops again. This isn't just about inheritance anymore. This is about what happens when someone lies too much, takes too much, and crosses every line. It's about making sure they never get away with it. Court day. The courtroom was small, old, and dead silent. A few reporters were there, apparently tipped off about a family inheritance fraud case. That made Diane furious. She whispered something to her lawyer and stared daggers at me like I called the press. I didn't. But I wasn't mad they came. Dad wasn't there. He wasn't in any condition to handle it. He gave a deposition earlier with a court-appointed guardian present. I sat on one side with Hal, our lawyer. Behind me sat Natalie, the former caregiver who was ready to testify. Tony the PI sat beside her, calm as ever, flipping through a leather notebook. Diane sat across from me in another sleek outfit, all black again like she was attending a funeral. Her lawyer looked exhausted already. Probably was. He'd filed and withdrawn 4 different motions in the last month trying to stall the case. Then the judge walked in. Diane's lawyer went first. Said she acted out of love. That she was only doing what was best for her father. And that I was the one pushing Dad to distrust her. He painted me as some bitter, isolated guy who couldn't handle his sister being closer to Dad. I didn't flinch. I let him finish. Then Hal stood up, laid out the timeline, and submitted the pile of evidence. Emails. Bank records. Audio clips. Signed statements. Natalie testified next. She recounted Diane bragging about tricking our dad, word for word. Then came Tony. He walked through the forgery, how the fake loan had been tied to Dad's house, how the notary's credentials didn't check out, and how Diane had started draining funds before Dad's diagnosis, not after. The court was quiet the whole time. No coughing, no side conversations. Just that thick, uncomfortable silence when everyone realizes they're watching someone unravel. Then the judge asked if Diane wanted to say anything. She did. She stood up. Hands shaking. "You all think I'm a monster," she started. "But none of you understand what it's like to feel invisible in your own family. He never treated me like a daughter. I was always second to him." She pointed at me. "Everything I did was because I was sick of being ignored. I didn't steal. I took what should have been mine." The judge interrupted. "Are you admitting to forging your father's signature on the loan?" She froze. Tears welled up. Then she broke. "Yes. Okay? I forged it. But only because I was desperate. Brett was going to leave. We were drowning. I thought I could fix it before anyone noticed." She turned toward me. "And you You always acted like Dad was your property. You were waiting for him to die so you could take the house. That stung. Not because it was true. Because she believed it. The judge thanked her and told her to sit. She collapsed into the chair, sobbing. Her lawyer put a hand on her shoulder but looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Then Hal asked the judge if we could submit one final piece of evidence. Tony stood and walked a USB drive up to the clerk. It's a social media video, he said. Originally private. Recently recovered. The video played on a monitor in the courtroom. It was Diane, drunk, laughing, holding a wine glass. Behind her, Brett's voice. You seriously made him sign it? And Diane replies. He didn't even read it. I told him it was a flu shot form. They both laugh. She says, if this works, we're golden. No more bills. Just wait for the old man to croak. Gasps in the courtroom. One reporter scribbled so fast her pen broke. Diane buried her face in her hands. The judge took 5 minutes. Came back with his decision. The revised will was invalidated permanently. The original will reinstated. Diane was ordered to repay what she stole, including the shady loan tied to the house. A criminal investigation was referred to the DA's office for elder fraud and forgery. A guardian was officially assigned to manage Dad's affairs going forward. And finally, Ms. Diane, you have not only broken the law, but you broke the trust of your family. The damage you've caused may never be repaired. Outside the courtroom, Diane tried to talk to me. She was crying. I didn't mean for it to get this far. Please. You have to believe me. I just looked at her and said, I don't. She reached out to hug me. I stepped back. Tony walked me to the parking lot. You did the right thing, he said. But I know it doesn't feel good. He was right. Dad's safe now. His guardian is someone we trust. I still visit every week, take him to the park when the weather's decent. He asks about Diane sometimes. I just say, she's okay. She and Brett lost their house. The loan company filed against them too. No idea where they live now. Haven't heard a word since. Hal says the DA might press charges. Maybe jail time. Maybe not. I don't really care anymore. You always think betrayal will come from some stranger. Some scammer or thief. But sometimes it's your own blood. Smiling. Sitting next to your father. Calling him Daddy while she steals from him. That's the part one still can't shake. I didn't want revenge. I wanted the truth out. I wanted Dad protected. I wanted peace. Now that I have it, there's an emptiness I didn't expect. I don't know if I'll ever talk to my sister again. I don't even know what I'd say. Maybe one day. Maybe never. But for now, I know this, she was wrong. I did see a dime. Every last one.